Now the end is near, and so I face the final.
Thank you, Howard. He's truly an inspiration. Early in my tenure in New York, I went to visit Howard in Milwaukee, and from that day I met him to now, I've never failed to be inspired by him. Let's really give it up for a great educational hero. I can't tell you how good it feels to be in this room today with so many committed educational warriors, people who are giving their lives for the kids of this country to make their opportunities a better place. I want to thank the Alliance and thank Nina, who I've known for such a long time, who is a great and inspiring leader and who's come to this task at such a critical moment. We need great leadership, both to seize the opportunities and to resolve the challenges that the charter school movement makes. When I was Chancellor, I went on the board of this organization, and 2 years ago, I proudly accepted nomination into your Hall of Fame, and I wear that Hall of Fame nomination with enormous pride. But I also want to say we are at a critical time in American history, and so today in my remarks, I want to take a step backward and look at what happened in New York City with education reform and charter schools and how we changed the lives of kids so that we recall not only what is possible, but we redouble our effort to make sure we achieve much, much more in the years ahead. I believe the future of our country depends upon us creating a world in which your zip code, your skin color, your family income doesn't determine the quality of your education. We are not there today. We have got to get there if America is going to be the America that Langston Hughes talked about. It's hard for me to believe, but it's been a long 11 years this month when Michael Bloomberg, a newly elected mayor in New York, appointed me, a non-educator, as Chancellor of the public schools. The world back then looked very, very different. The mayor had been given control of the schools for the first time. This was groundbreaking in New York. You had the #1 elected official, the leader of the city, saying something you very rarely hear. He said, as mayor, hold me accountable for education. I'm responsible. I want to be in charge. And it made education just as important as the other great areas in the city: healthcare, fire, safety, economic development, and so on. And it did something else that was very important. It ended the dysfunctional rule of a school board that was riven by politics, become dominated by various interest groups who put their needs ahead of the needs of our children. And Mayor Bloomberg and I took a system that was rife with finger-pointing and paralysis, one with almost biannual turnover in the Chancellor's office and a graduation rate that was below 50% and hadn't moved for over a decade. We turned that mess into an 8-year partnership that pushed through so many educational reforms at scale that New York became a model for school districts throughout the country. Today, there are more alumni of New York City running school districts and states than from any place else, and that's because those people were involved in the big changes that took place. And let me be clear, a big part, right from the beginning, of that reform effort that the mayor led centered around expanding options for parents and students and giving them choices. I want to cut to the chase here, because if we don't get this, we don't get it. Middle-class and wealthy parents have always had choices when it comes to their children's education. Why should those who are economically challenged, those who have the hardest hand to play, why should they be told for their kids it's one and done? That's profoundly wrong, and we were determined in New York to change it. To do that, we knew we had to create more good schools and that charters would have to play a central role. Now remember, this was 11 years ago, in 2002. When I became Chancellor, in a city with 1.1 million kids, there were some 18 charter schools scattered across the landscape. They were then considered experiments. Up to that point, the opponents of charters had basically made their growth as difficult as possible. They had to wait a year or more to access federal and state funding, bureaucracy and red tape, including caps, on charters stood in their way at every turn. And it was almost impossible in New York for charters to open because they couldn't find the money for a building in the most expensive real estate market in America. The bottom line, the forces of the status quo didn't want any competition, so they had locked charters out and were actively denying children and their parents the opportunity to choose a better way. To fix that, we closed over 100 failing schools. That's unprecedented. And we replaced them in two ways. One, with 350 new, often much smaller public schools, creating real choice and opportunity. And during my tenure alone, we went from 18 charters to 125. And when school opens in New York City in the fall of 2013, there'll be over 180 charters, a tenfold increase under Mayor Bloomberg's tenure. And what we did, thank you. We aggressively recruited and supported the great CMOs and also the individual schools, the groups like Achievement First, KIPP, Uncommon, Harlem Success. So we maintained, even during that period of rapid growth, we maintained high quality. We insisted on it, we demanded on it, and it wasn't there, we closed charter schools. We addressed the funding issues and the inequities that were there by marshaling public-private partnerships to help seed the development of charters. We put an end to the red tape and the obstacles, all the bureaucratic impediments, and we addressed the real estate problem through co-location, which was a big deal. We allowed charter schools to share space with existing public schools. Let's be clear. After all, the space belongs to the students and their families, not the politicians, not the bureaucrats, and not the interest groups. It's their schools. This not only solved the real estate problem, it made choices for parents that much clearer. You know, you didn't have to travel very far when you had several schools in one building for parents to see what the options and the differences were. They were right there in front of their eyes, and it had a real impact. We also changed overall the way you manage a school district by getting the central office cookie-cutter bureaucracy out of the way. Instead, now that we had so many new great schools with strong leaders, we empowered those leaders. We said, look, you come up with a plan to hit a high bar. We'll let you do it your way. But at the end of the day, you're accountable for the results for our kids. You know, we even had our principals across the city sign agreements with us implementing this bargain. In essence, what we did is not only open charter schools, but we went a long way to charterizing the public schools, the core principles of leadership, empowerment, and accountability. And it was a big change in education. In the past, principals, as in so many places today, were largely the agents of the bureaucracy, being controlled from outside with very little discretion and power. We flipped it. That's the way great organizations and great companies work. They don't micromanage. They bring in terrific talent, give them the tools, let them lead, and hold them accountable. Truth be told, no school district, certainly no large school district, had ever done anything like that. And we got big results in the city of New York. After a decade of stagnation, our four-year graduation rate went from below 50% to close to 70%. That affected literally thousands and tens of thousands of kids. And there were many other metrics that showed significant improvement, including winning the Broad Prize. And as for charters, what we saw there is that there are today some 60,000 students in New York City charter schools with more than 50,000 on the wait list. Overwhelmingly, those students come from our low-income communities, and overwhelmingly, those are students of color in New York. But let me just give you one statistic here that matters. This year, for some 18,600 charter seats, over 70,000 families applied. The people are voting with their feet. And you can't underestimate the power of this change and the impact it's had on families. So many, even to this day, stop me in the street and thank me, saying, you gave my second kid, an opportunity that the city had denied my first kid. They went from no hope and no options to choices. In short, we created real competition in New York in a robust way. And there's no better example of that than the story I want to tell about what happened in Harlem. When I started, Harlem was one of the lowest performing, abysmal school communities in the city of New York. And one of the first people I met when I became chancellor was a man known to many of you, Jeffrey Canada. And I can tell you this, like Howard Fuller when you meet him, everyone who knows him will agree with me, you never forget the first time you meet Jeff Canada. He's a passionate warrior for kids. It's never about Jeff. It's only about his children. He worked for decades, long before I got there, in the city, improving the lives of kids and families in Harlem by turning schools into community centers with wraparound services from health care to nighttime classes. He came up with the idea of taking over a city block at first, one that was a hard-hit block in every respect, and saturating it with every resource imaginable: parental care, job training, early childhood, you name it. This approach, which we all know has become a national model, was called the Harlem Children's Zone. It grew from 1 block to 10, then 20, and now almost 100 blocks. First time Jeff and I met in 2002, he told me, you know, I'm doing amazing things for these kids. I have them excelling by kindergarten, and then we send them off to your schools, and you erase all the progress. He said, I want to help fix them. It would be funny if it weren't so tragic. He said, you can help. He said, I want to help fix that. I want in. And he presented me an elaborate, ambitious transformation plan, an education pipeline from cradle to career. And I told him at the time, Jeff, I love your idea, but it's not going to work. By the time we got the bureaucracy to make all of these ideas a reality, Mayor Bloomberg and I will be long out of office. Back then, we didn't want to wait for change to come tomorrow. We wanted it today. And the only way to make that happen in Harlem was to Jeff to open up a charter school that would provide a powerful signal, not just to the Harlem community, but the entire city. I told him, Jeff, we're going to take your initials from Harlem Children's Zone, HCZ, and we're going to use those to mean Harlem Charter Zone. And that's exactly what we did. Working with Jeff and so many other great educators, we embarked on one of the most ambitious transformation projects ever seen in public education. The department brought in Jeff's group called Promise Academy and some of the most forward, innovative thinking people in the charter movement, the KIPS, the Democracy Preps, the Harlem Successes, and many others. And what a difference it made. Today, almost half the kids starting in elementary and middle school in Harlem choose a charter. Their parents have become so informed and advised of the differences, and many of them still wait on the wait lists. And think about this. I don't want to give you too many numbers, but sometimes we've got to wrap our head around these numbers. Today in the city, in the entire city, of the top 11 performing middle schools, 4 of them are charter schools in Harlem. Another 3 of them are charter schools in other parts of the city. And several of the elementary schools are also knocking the ball out of the park. We have charter schools in Harlem that are performing at the same level as gifted and talented schools that admit kids on the most rigorous testing criteria, and the charters simply take kids in a high-needs community and admit them by lottery. And there's been a lot of independent research, people like Carolyn Hoxby and Mackie Raymond, who've done rigorous designs showing how we've changed the world with the results we're getting there. Let me just, again, give you a couple of things. We've made significant progress in English language arts, but the charter schools in Harlem have made stunning gains in math. Think about this. In a recent study by Credo, under the leadership of Margaret Raymond, she found that our Harlem charter schools, in a matched comparison to the public schools, same kids, same background, kids who applied to charters didn't get in, kids who got in. In 1 year in the public schools, the charter schools got 1.7 years of mathematics learning. That's enormous. Over the course of a 13-year education, you're talking about a difference of 9 more years of education. Think about if we could do that for every kid in America today. And let me be clear, the gains weren't just limited to the charter schools. Choice helped all the schools. It created a rising tide. They had to compete. No longer could you sit back and say, we'll get the same 120 kids next year no matter what happens. You had to go out there. If your school wasn't good, the parents would go someplace else. And so in a recent study, it was found, it's amazing, if you made, we have 32 school districts in New York City. If Harlem were one of those 32, you aggregated the community into a district. In 2006, it would have been 28th in math. This is everything, public school, charter schools, the whole 9 yards. 2006, it would have been 28th in math. It went all the way up by 2012 to 16th. That means it was passing other school districts 2 a year, 6 consecutive years. That is huge, and it proves something that we need to put the lie to, and that is poverty in America is not destiny. Education is the solution. But I'm sad to say, despite the facts, there are still people who tell me, and certainly when I was Chancellor, they told me, you know, Chancellor, we'll never fix education in America until we fix poverty. But those people have it exactly backward. We'll never fix poverty in America until we fix education. Let me be clear about this. Let me be clear. Being raised in poverty in a very challenged family matters. I don't want to make believe that this isn't a real issue. Its debilitating psychological and physical effects often make it much harder to educate kids successfully. And we should do everything we can as a nation and as individuals to ameliorate the effects of poverty by giving kids and the families the support they need. But that said, I remain convinced today, as much as on the day I started 11 years ago, that the best cure for poverty is a great education. And I'm equally convinced that pointing to poverty as an excuse for why we fail to properly educate poor kids only serves to condemn more of them to lives of poverty. We repeat the cycle. There are amazing public schools across this country, both charter and traditional public schools, showing us that when you take great principals who support great teachers, set high expectations, and make sure you give people the right resources, you can change the world. We spent so much time in the Bloomberg administration trying to get dysfunctional adult politics out of the way of student progress, so remarkable successes like the story I told you about Harlem would be possible. It took pushing, hard pushing at times, against entrenched, powerful, and bureaucratic interests, who frankly had a lot to lose from a major change in the status quo, and they knew it, and they fought back hard. The key ingredient to the work that we did in New York is a simple word. It's a word called courage. Mike Bloomberg had it. Jeffrey Canada had it. Howard Fuller has it. And thousands of parents across the city of New York, they had it. They fought with us for making sure we opened up opportunities to do what's right. Courage to do what's right, to make a change when you know it's needed. And courage to tell the powerful politicians and the special interests, no thanks. This time, we're putting the kids first. So to be truthful to you, it saddens me as we approach the end of the Bloomberg administration to see such a lack of courage among many, if not most, of the candidates running to replace him when it comes to the issue of choice in public education. With rare exceptions, the debates have shown candidates pandering to the special interests that for far too long have controlled our public schools. Some of these people want to turn back the clock and take choice and opportunity away from parents. They wouldn't say it quite that way, but they talk about ending or freezing charter co-location. They refuse to stand up and say when the cap is hit, we'll change the cap. And without co-location, to be blunt about it, given the real estate costs in New York, you're sending a clear message there'll be no more charters to speak of. You know, I think oftentimes the politicians and the powerful, they ignore our kids, because our kids, they don't have a political action committee or a city hall lobbyist. So my advice to our candidates in New York, and frankly, in every place where they run, courage. Courage means putting children first and the special interests last. Our kids not only deserve that, they need that, and I think that's what the voters want to see from real leadership. So let's start showing in politics that we have our priorities straight. While I'm on the subject, I want to echo a theme that Nina mentioned. I think it's high time that we in this room also get a little more courageous. We're doing many great things, and I salute you for it. And the best charters, like many of the schools in Harlem, are models of success that show the country what's possible and inspire each of us every day. But the worst charters give school choice opponents the strongest talking point they have in their arsenal, that charter schools on average don't perform better or worse than traditional schools. We know the statement masks over the bright shining stars of the movement and also plays sometimes a game with the numbers. But we also know there's an element of truth here, and we can't let it continue. I think we have to hold all schools to a high standard, including charter schools. Failing kids is failing kids. And if you can't make the cut and can't improve, then we need to take action with the charter as well as with the public. You hurt this organization by not insisting that it get out front. Yes, take the lead on this core issue. What the best charters have taught us is that when you unleash innovation and creativity, students blossom. That's the lesson I've learned from high-performing schools in New York, and it's a lesson I'm still learning from education technology. What's clear now is that while creating meaningful choice is one of the most important things we can do, we need to create choices not only in schools, but for students on how they learn, the pace they learn at, and the whole issue of personalization and individualization. When I was chancellor, I saw some amazing schools like the iSchool in New York, the School of One, and how they use technology to support their teachers. But they were the exception. And in many school districts, quite frankly, it's been about gizmos and gadgets, not about improving teaching and learning. The last thing we need is another pile of unused laptops. For decades, people have talked about the potential of computers, but that potential has not been met. And the reason is, it's not about hardware. It's not about gadgets. What it's about is using technology to empower teachers and improve the way students learn. I've seen it happen. It can be powerful. Take teachers, make them powerful, give them the tools they need, give them support and curriculum and content, and watch this thing move. That's why when I left the New York public schools, I decided I wanted to do whatever I can to take educational technology to the next level. I'm convinced, if done right, but emphasis on doing it right, this can have one of the most tremendous impacts, both on how and how well we teach our kids. Look, let me close, and again, I thank you for the opportunity to be among friends, colleagues, and people who are devoting their lives to make it a better world for our kids. Every child deserves a world-class public education, and far too many of them are getting it today. We've spent long enough looking at bar graphs and showing how our students are falling behind the rest of the world, how we're not getting the progress we need, and we know the challenges. We have got to move forward and bring those challenges to an opportunity and to reality. Today, as I stand here in this global, high-tech economy, I know what's going to be demanded of our kids in the 21st century, and I worry as America falls further and further behind. To me, the greatest challenge that we today face is that the American dream, the thing that brought immigrants from all over the world, the thing that changed lives, the glue that held our society together, the notion that in America, it's not where you come from, it's where you're going that matters. My greatest fear, and I think the issue for this generation of Americans, is to make sure the American dream does not become the American memory on our watch. That is our challenge, and I want you today to pledge with me that as long as we draw breath, we will fight for what's right. It's not easy. It can be costly and painful at times, and there'll be others who are going to fight very hard to make sure that the status quo gets defended because it serves their interests. But in the end, in Langston Hughes's words, We need to make sure that America becomes America again. Thank you, and God bless you.